Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by sharing a recent episode of the foXnoMad podcast with you. My guest today is Eric O'Neill. He is an FBI operative, cybersecurity expert, author, and speaker who's here to talk about what the future of AI holds for your concerns about cybersecurity, where the world is going. But also we talk about Robert Hanssen, who was a notorious Russian mole, and Eric is one of the operatives who helped bust that case wide open and capture that spy. So we're going to talk about that case. We're going to talk about cybersecurity and AI and what we have to look forward to and what maybe we should be a little bit more careful about and how to protect your own cybersecurity online.
Thanks, Eric, for being on the podcast. I was really interested to speak with you just because cybersecurity is both a personal passion, but also the subject that just keeps on giving in good and bad ways. I think we're at a time where there's sort of this convergence of cybersecurity and AI, and a lot of people don't know where it goes from here. Um, but I think before we start, I just like to, how did you get into cybersecurity and how did your career begin?
Well, I was always somebody who was interested in computers. I was actually an engineer at one point in college. I didn't stick with it, but programming for me was something I did when I was very young with the first computer my family bought. And I got to say, back then, if you were a teenage kid and you wanted to run a game on whatever machine you bought, you pretty much had to know a little bit of coding. So a lot of people like me got into coding just going to talk to the resident geek at the game store, and you bought your new game and it wouldn't run, and you talk to him and you'd alter some lines of code. And now any company who produces anything would be horrified at that. Like, you violated our terms of service, but back then that's the way you did it. And I would build and exchange parts and computers. So I was always fascinated with computerization, and I started to be fascinated with security and how you break security. Never did anything illegal. Couldn't have gotten in the FBI if I did. But I was one of those people who looked at security as a way. Let's see if I can break it, so I can think about how to make it stronger, and sort of put that to the side as I went into the FBI and got engaged in counterintelligence and counterterrorism. And there was more than enough work and education there to keep me going. I got back into cybersecurity after I left the FBI and after working on the Hanssen case. And interestingly, Hanssen wasn't just the most damaging spy in US history, and this is the spy that I caught my last case at the FBI. He was also our first cyber spy. And the undercover operation that the FBI put together and put me in the center of as the undercover asset was to build cybersecurity for the FBI. That was the overt job for Hanssen. And my covert job was to investigate him and find the information that led to his arrest. So we were doing the active work of building cybersecurity for the FBI. And ironically, even though he was the most damaging spy in FBI's history and quite possibly in US history, he was actually pretty brilliant in his ideas in how we can make security better. After I left the FBI, I continued in cybersecurity, both as an attorney and then later as a national security strategist for cybersecurity companies.
So, for those who are listening and watching who may not know about the Hanssen case or remember it in detail, I remember when it happened and just the sort of the news coming out. But if you could give a little bit of a background on sort of who he was and how you got sort of involved in the case. How do those things actually play out? Does somebody come into your office and say, "Hey, here's what's going on," or is it a much more sort of slow introduction into what you may be doing?
Actually, it was way weirder than that. So a little bit of background on Hanssen. Hanssen was certainly the most damaging spy in FBI's entire history. He was a decorated supervisory special agent. He had at one point been in charge of auditing legats or legal attaché offices all around the world, FBI offices. He was the top Soviet analyst at one point. So during the time of the Soviet Union, before it fell and collapsed and was reformed into what we now have is the Russian Federation, Hanssen was one of the top spy hunters. His job as an analyst was to determine who was coming here in the United States and in our embassy, and was pretending to be the third director of agriculture, but it was actually a line KR SVR officer who was in charge of recruiting moles in U.S. Government and industry. So he knew intrinsically about how to catch a spy and who the spies were, and how the Soviet Union worked and how Russia later worked. He was also the top spy in the US intelligence community and had been the top spy for over 22 years without anyone knowing. And just to tell you how good he was, at one point, the FBI went to their top Soviet analyst and said, we know we have a mole. We're losing all this information. We're losing the counterintelligence war. There was the Cold War, but there was also the counterintelligence war with the Soviet Union. And we're losing it because there is somebody here in the intelligence community giving them all this information. And we want you to give us an idea of who that is. So they put him in charge of catching himself. That's how good he was.
Wow.
And of course, he made sure that the FBI was on this massive wild goose chase, and the NSA and CIA and all the rest of the intelligence community as well. And so looking at this spy, he was successful for 22 years, gave up some of the most damaging secrets that have ever been given to a foreign power, including things like our entire nuclear warfare program, like what we would do if there was a nuclear war, if they fired first, if we chose to fire first, our continuity government plan, where we would send the government if there was a catastrophic event, but also undercover operations that failed, undercover operatives that lost their covers and couldn't work anymore. And our spies in the Soviet Union, all of which were disappeared. They're either executed or sent into hard labor because he gave them up. So he was a really bad guy. And there was so much more that he did. But what's important was how he did it. He was able to penetrate computer systems that were never built to defend against a trusted insider. And he did it viciously. He gave up billions of dollars worth of secrets and only took millions in return. So how do I get on this case? Well, at the last minute, before Robert Hanssen is ready to retire, take his 25-year pension and gold watch and ride off into the sunset and probably go work for a cybersecurity company and steal from them too. A former KGB source who had stolen the file information when he was out of a job when the KGB collapsed and just kept it in his attic or basement or somewhere for decades, decided he wanted a better life for himself. So he sold it to an FBI CIA joint task force. And when this little squad of FBI agents opened the file, they gave him like $14 million, which was more than Hanssen made during all his spying. When they opened the little file, they put the clues together. It was a trash bag, a cassette tape, and a bunch of letters. And by reading the letters and doing some analysis, they started recognizing the voice. When they ran the trash bag, which is how Hanssen would wrap his drops of secrets that he put under a footbridge and leave for a Russian intelligence officer to come pick up, they found a partial fingerprint that pointed at Hanssen. And when they listened to the tape, they heard his voice. He actually called the consulate once. It was his one huge mistake, the Russian consulate, to ask where his money was. He'd left a drop of secrets under a footbridge, and he'd gone to look for the $50,000 that were supposed to leave him somewhere, and it wasn't there. So he called to ask where it was. They had no idea who he was, so they were really excited when they got the call. So he was only known to them by a code name called Ramon Garcia. At the very end of his career, in December of 2000, we learned that Hanssen is quite possibly, this is all circumstantial evidence, but Hanssen is quite possibly the spy we've been after for over 2 decades. And he's about to leave. And he had also been banished to the State Department because he had problems with authority and problems with subordinates. And they just wanted him to kind of ride out the rest of his career and leave the FBI. So now they're faced with having to bring him back. And they wanted to put him in a position where he would steal secrets and we could catch him red-handed. So 2 problems. How do we do that? And who do we put undercover against him to to one, prevent him from stealing the secrets, but 2, learn the information that's going to lead to his arrest? We needed a smoking gun. We wanted to catch him red-handed. So they did something really ballsy. They created a brand new section in the FBI called the Information Assurance Section, which today means cybersecurity, and put him in charge of it, which flattered him It's something he'd wanted to do his entire career. And they said, you're the only one who can do it. And it was the pretext to bring him back to headquarters and give him access to all this data. Like he had access to the data center in the FBI. And then they looked for the only person who knew how to catch a spy and turn a computer on in the FBI. And that turned out to be me, even though I was never trained to do this. I was an FBI ghost. My job was to follow targets clandestinely and use disguises and telephoto lenses and all sort of pretexts and social engineering, and never actually show my badge, to be a different person every time my target saw me, not actually talk to them. And here I was asked to go into a room and have conversations with Hanssen and slowly draw out information without him knowing that that's what I was doing. And no one traded me for it. They just hoped I was successful. And it turns out that I was.
Wow. So you sort of took that is an incredible story. There's so many questions, but I guess you take your social engineering skills, right? And you try to apply it to this real life situation, which is different than making a phone call or something. I mean, you have the person right there in front of you. I mean, when you're in that situation, what's going through your mind? I mean, are you trying to not act differently? How much self-analysis is happening, and how do you kind of get over that, when you're trying
Right.
to just be natural?
When you're undercover, you have to completely fall into the role. It's like a method acting. I had this conversation with Ryan Phillippe, the, A-list actor, Hollywood actor who plays me in the movie Breach. And, as we were talking about what I did in the FBI, he said, it's a lot like what I do. And I thought about it, and in movies that he did, like Flags of Our Fathers, where he's playing a real life person, or playing me, right? He had to become part of the role. And I was thinking, that's what I was doing too. That's what you do when you're undercover. You create this persona for yourself and you live it. You don't just like put it on like a hat, but you actually live it. And any failure to do that is a clue to your adversary that you're not being honest, that you're being deceptive, which is what we were both being. I mean, I was trying to deceive him. He's trying to deceive the entire FBI. At the same time, he's trying to figure out whether this is an investigation. He had to be suspicious. And I was his only point of attack. And so I had to be better at it than he was. And I think part of what helped me is I was like, 27 at the time, 26, 27. So there's no way that a career FBI person with his hubris, his narcissism, could believe that the FBI would throw a 27-year-old undercover surveillance operative into an office at headquarters to investigate him. I just don't think he could. He had this bias. He couldn't believe it. But that's exactly what I was doing. And I bumbled and I fumbled. And you asked, what was going on in my mind constantly? Don't screw up. That's what I kept saying. That was my mantra. Don't screw up. Don't fail. Don't blow this. Everybody's relying on you. Multi-million-dollar operation. And our last chance to catch the spy. And just don't screw up. And somehow getting through it, I managed to win. You did ask about how I got put on the case. And it was one of the weirdest stories. It's how I open my book, Gray Day. It started with a phone call on a Sunday morning. And my supervisor, the supervisory special agent, G. McClellan, in charge of my entire team of ghosts, shows up at my house unannounced on a Sunday morning, which never happens, right, in the government. Your boss doesn't come to you. You always go to them. Asked me to come outside and talk to him. I thought I was about to get arrested for something. And he asked me if I'd ever heard of a guy named Robert Hanssen, and I hadn't. And then he says, we want you to go undercover to catch the guy. And I was blown away. And he says, my next conversation is with the director of the FBI. I'm thinking, this is crazy. Like I'm hitting my head. Like, am I still asleep? Is this some weird dream? And he wants to know whether you're in or out. And what are you supposed to say? I said, I'm in, of course. There's like a career-making moment. This stuff doesn't happen. And after the case broke and we arrested Hanssen, I remember one of the senior agents came up to me and he said, so Eric, how does it feel to have worked the most incredible case you're ever going to work in your entire career of the FBI? You could retire at 60 years old and you'll never have another case like that.
Wow.
And my thoughts I was like, maybe it's time to go. Leave when you're ahead, right?
You're at the top.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it must have been very interesting to set that all up because, like you mentioned, cybersecurity was very different at that time. It wasn't very formalized, in terms of things. I mean, 20 years have passed now. Like, how? What are some sort of key things that you learned from that investigation that that is sort of just standard now? That
Right.
back
Well,
then you might
look,
people want to think of.
our biggest conundrum back then was still a problem that we have today. How do you secure an environment when you're going to give it access to the internet? The most insecure or unsecure technology ever created. I mean, if you think of it, the internet is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing. I mean, the entire compendium of knowledge of all of human existence is there for anyone to go reach out and learn from, and constantly being added to. On the other hand, it's an avenue for attackers of all kinds to hit anyone, anywhere, without even getting up from where they live. So the FBI was struggling, and what Hanssen and I were actually working on, and we did some good work, is how can a agent working in an FBI office have access to the internet and the very secure FBI databases and systems on the same computer? Because back then there was no internet access. Like, information was actually sent from field office to field office on these underground buried T3 lines. It was like this network of cabling, just to keep things safe. And when you had to move information that couldn't be sent easily that way, you put it on discs, you put it in an armored suitcase, you handcuffed it to some dude, and he took it across the country to the next office, right? It was crazy and archaic by today's standards, but it was much more secure, kind of like a nuclear power plant. The ops center has no access to the internet because we just don't really want bad guys melting things down. And so we were trying to figure out how can these agents and personnel not have to get up and walk across to like the one internet computer sitting in a squad room and use their AOL or Yahoo address to correspond. We didn't even have email addresses back then. It's all changed now. The same thing that business is doing to protect those systems, the FBI is doing. But we are still working on that problem. How do we secure an environment when it has access to the outside, when vendors are able to access, when employees are able to access, when all those employees are horrible weak links in security because they're the point of attack? And just as you said earlier, those attacks are social engineering. It's not like somebody's using a computer to brute force another computer. That's fiction. That's movies. It's actually someone who's tricking someone into opening the door and letting them in.
And the internet now it's essential, right? We all need or have access to the internet. I think, maybe 20 years ago, you could have made the case that, hey, just don't check your email during work hours, or don't hop on Messenger or something like that. But that's not realistic now. And we all have cameras on our phones. So there's this different level of these sophisticated recording devices. And that you kind of mentioned it, that the internet is sort of designed to be very open, right? That's
Right.
ideal. We don't want any barriers to the internet, really. But at the same time, that makes it so difficult to secure things. So, do as many disadvantages as it brings, does it give you other advantages to have, the internet or internet accessible things? Is there sort of a balance that's happened, or is it just way more difficult?
Well, certainly. We wouldn't be talking right now. 20 years ago, you would be working at like a news agency, and you would be having me come in, whether flying or taking the train or driving, and we would sit down in a studio and we'd have this conversation, and it would be recorded and it would be broadcast on TV, right? Uh, but today we can do this. I mean, there's so much access to information. Anyone can get their message out. Everyone can become a thought leader because you can build your own platform. The internet has freed information in a way that is exceptional. I mean, information used to be gated, and you couldn't get it unless you subscribe to this or you watch this, and it was very, in a way, it could be curated, but now information is out there. Now there are good parts to that, and there's drawbacks to that. I mean, you can learn so much more, you can digest so much more, you can see so much more, but you can also fall into traps of disinformation, and today AI deepfakes and all of those problems. I think the sum total, I think if you look at the sum total, pros versus cons, the internet is a wonderful thing. And it was absolutely necessary. We learned how incredible it was and how important it was to continue our way of lives in the middle of that pandemic. I mean, we all try to forget the pandemic. I like to say, like, when you say COVID-19 today, it's like saying the word Voldemort in the Harry Potter universe. Nobody wants to hear it. Everybody gets afraid. We want to pretend that the world didn't lose its mind and go crazy for a few years. Unnecessary lockdowns. But what happened was we learned how to communicate and how to work and how to continue to share information and collaborate in a environment that doesn't require us to be sitting in the same room. And that has opened up the world. It certainly opened up, an entire globe of people who can work and collaborate together on different business without having to get on airplanes all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up some really interesting points, and you bring up AI, and Apple just had an event yesterday or 2 days ago, and AI was sort of the central theme. It's the central theme of pretty much everything has AI. Like any product now,
Yes.
it's pretty much have AI in it. But it brings a new set of security challenges, I imagine, because when I'm online, when I'm scrolling, I have to ask myself, is this real? And it's very
Right.
easy for a photo or a video to just go viral and it totally not be real. And the technology there is really incredible. I mean, just the leaps that it's taken in the last few years. How does that affect, like, I mean, aside from what we can see and misinformation, how is, like people can just write scripts that can, attack websites or, what is this sort of this can of worms that's been opened?
Well, I think it changes quite a bit. I write in my new book. I have a book coming out early next year called The Invisible Threat. And I've got a chapter about AI. I have a few chapters really about AI, but one thing that I write is that trust has become an uncommon commodity. Exactly what you just said, that you can't really trust your eyes anymore. And there are predictions that by 2026, 90% of what we see on the internet, new content, will be synthetically generated. Now, that doesn't mean it's deepfakes or disinformation, but that it's generated using AI. So you want to write something, AI writes it for you, you edit. You want to produce a video, AI produces the whole video, and you're just doing some editing on the video. You've told it what you want, and it does it. In the next year, we are going to see entire movies that are created by one person who does all the voices. You can use AI to change your voice. You can sound like a woman, a man, like you're old, you're young, who creates all the scenes and have beautiful cityscapes or starscapes or future galaxies, whatever you want to create, dramas, science fiction, entire movies. Just think of what that's going to do to the industry. You can have some really brilliant minds who never had an opportunity to work in sort of the closed Hollywood network. I mean, actors got to be scared about that as well. You're going to see entertainment, a whole new venues of entertainment that are created synthetically. So there's the good side. Now, you also mentioned some of the bad side, and this is where I worry. Give it 2 years. I don't think anyone's going to be coding anymore. AI is going to be doing all of it, and you're going to have people who are experts who are going to be doing light checking. This is already happening with dark web cyber attackers. They're able to immensely scale their operations, which is why we have so many cybercrime, what I call criminal syndicates, or some call cybercrime gangs, that have sprung up and have entire business units and are using AI not only to write code, but perfect spear phishing emails to help them understand how to attack a certain person by doing some of the social engineering and the data analysis of individuals to try to figure out the best way to attack them. This is all scary stuff. The solution, of course, is to use AI on the side of the angels, right? So you got the bad AI and the good AI. And what's actually happening right now, and it's sort of nuts if you think about it, is that 1980s movie Tron, where all the programs are fighting each other with laser discs and light cycles and that kind of stuff. It's happening today, just not with the laser discs and light cycles. There are AI on dark web. Let's call it dark web AI versus cybersecurity AI, and it's constantly battling for your data. The AI is conducting counter surveillance to try to find the good AI. That the dark web AI is trying to do that. The good AI is trying to hunt the bad AI, and all these programs are just sitting there warring over that data that is now the currency of our lives. It's the most important thing that we own and use. It's really what drives not only economies but business. So that's the holy grail now for cybersecurity, deploying our own AI. And I think that we're all going to have a personal AI that helps us spot the fake, see what's real, see what's not. I think that in the future, you're going to be just running programs on top of everything else, something else you bolt on to, your phone or your PC, that as you're watching things on the internet, it's going to give you a pop-up. This is AI. This is synthetically generated. This is not true. This isn't a real person. But what happens when nothing's a real person anymore? When people are lazy, they don't want to get out of their pajamas, and the Eric AI avatar, who always looks great, is speaking while I'm sitting there on the couch, just, talking to my microphone.
I mean, yeah, that you bring up a lot of good points there. So, I imagine, for example, in the Hanssen case, right, you have this recording. Now, if you're in the same situation, right, you have to ask or maybe employ AI to see, is this an AI generated recording? Is this the real voice of this person? Are we being misled?
Right.
So,
remember in the run up to, I believe it was the New Hampshire primary elections, there was a robocall that went out, and it was Joe Biden's voice telling people not to vote. They even used like things like, this is a bunch of malarkey, don't go out and vote, you're just helping Trump, something like that. And people were really concerned over it. It ended up being a Democratic operative that didn't want him elected, but it was a deepfake. But it sounded exactly like him. Like, how are you supposed to know when you get a political call, right?
Yeah,
that it's fake. There were all those pictures that were released. It happens to, let's be nonpartisan. All the pictures that were released of Trump being surrounded by police officers in an orange jumpsuit, and people thought, oh, he must have gotten arrested. Like his legal cases must have gone bad, but they were all deep fakes. Things like that. If citizens aren't engaged and educated, they can be fooled. Because we tend to believe what we see, especially if we see it on TV, when you're scrolling through Facebook or you're scrolling through whatever social media app you love, which is just filled with this stuff. People tend to believe it. And I think it's very important. And it's one thing that I stump to do, is to educate people that don't trust what you see. We should always start, especially when we're online, with, I don't trust this. Now let me see if I can verify it's true, rather than, oh, this is great. And then you fall into the trap of maybe it's not true.
Yeah, and I bet it's even more difficult when you want to agree with something that you see. When you see something like, hey, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
It's hard to question that, right? Then especially when you're scrolling too, you're a little bit off guard. Your mind is sort of, the defenses are down, because we kind of use it as sort of, turn the brain off time. How should people go about trying to figure out if something is real or fake? And should that always be on the back of your mind when you're watching something?
Yeah, I think there's two issues here. One is, when you're watching things and you're in your echo chamber, you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see the same message reinforced again and again and again. So if you just watch one network, if you're just looking at one podcast, if you're just listening to one correspondent, then you could fall into that. What I do is I'm pretty nonpartisan in how I absorb my information. I look at all sorts of sides. I listen, to podcasts on all sides of the political spectrum, the tech spectrum, and I draw my own conclusions rather than have those conclusions fed to me, because you can fall into that trap very easily. So I think that's important. You need to broadly reach out and learn from a lot of different sources. And it's important to listen to two sources that don't agree with each other, so that you can play the middle and decide, what part of this I take and what part of that I don't believe. The other thing that can get very worrisome, and I think is more important, is understanding and spotting when someone is targeting you personally. So when someone is trying to social engineer you, when someone is trying to use an imposter attack or a confidence scheme to pretend they're someone that you trust and get you to do something you shouldn't do, like click on that link or open that attachment that installs malware like ransomware on your computer, or worse, fools you into believing that you're in a relationship, whether it's romantic or professional. Sometimes attackers pose as financial advisors. And after weeks of becoming your friend and talking to you, they get you to invest in their cryptocurrency scheme. And they have you invest a little, and then they show you these massive profits. And suddenly you're investing more and more until all your life savings is dumped into it. And then they disappear. That in cybersecurity, we call that pig butchering. And it's based on the old ancient Chinese art of, fattening up a pig bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally, when, it's gotten as fat as it can get, you slaughter it and you get all that meat. That's what these attackers are trying to do to innocent people that are become their victims.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds scary, and it is, as someone who has a lot of their voice and face on the internet for a very long period of time.
Yes.
You think like someone could just AI generate my voice and call somebody I know and really run a very elaborate scam, and they
Yes.
would probably have no idea. I mean, it would take some time, because the AI is like the fake generated stuff is very good now. So
It's excellent.
how, I mean, I feel like we should all be worried, but at the same time, how do we exist in this world that's coming up? Like, what is it that we should be doing for that, that disaster scenario where you get a phone call and it's your son, or it's,
Mm-hmm.
it's a sibling or something, and they're asking you for money and they need you to
That's a
wire
good one.
something.
Yeah, I have that's a chapter in my new book on imposter attacks. And the answer to that is when you get a call from your family member who says, "Dad, I've been kidnapped, and if you don't pay, they're going to kill me." You say, "What's the code word?" And if they don't know the code word, it's probably not true, or it could not be true, right? So with my family, we have what we used to, in counterterrorism, we used to call it a sign of life. In case you got grabbed by a terrorist and they're trying to ransom you back, they want to make sure you're still alive, right? They just aren't going to take money and dump your corpse. And so we would actually put the sign of life, our code phrase, in an envelope that no one opened until they needed it. With your family, you have that set up. It can be some funny word. It can be something that means something only to you, that isn't easy to guess, just like a password. And then, that your son, if kidnapped, is going to work it into the conversation. He might only have that one chance, and you're going to know it's true. The bad guy's not going to know it, right? So if they're trying to deepfake your child's voice or your voice, or a friend's voice, there's no way that they know that code phrase. So that's one way to do that, and it's a very effective way to do it. Impersonation attacks are on the rise, and across the spectrum. That family attack is used. Romance fraud was, not really ironically, you can understand why, it was one of the largest, and I think the biggest cyber crime during the pandemic, when people were lonely and criminals were liking them, their posts on Facebook, and then starting chats and then becoming their friends, or people were going on dating sites just for connection, and those can be filled with imposters. I just wrote a article about Facebook Marketplace and how to be careful, because there are so many people who are using imposter attacks there. They're pretending to be valid sellers and buyers, and they're using all sorts of schemes to take your money and never send you something, or get you to pay them, and or say they're going to pay you, and you send them the item and they never send you any money. So there's a lot to be, like I said, the internet it's an amazing place, but it's not really a safe place. We always have to be wary and on our guard.
I feel like with any technology, there's a split when it comes to generations, right? So I think about my parents who like, if to try to I mean, they know what fake voices and videos are, but like to try to get into how all these AI things can be used is going to be one story. And then there are people who are tech savvy or growing up with these technologies where it's like social media. Like kids now, it's just normal for them, right? It's just like part of existing. And there's always this divide. So I'm curious, if you were to give advice to, let's say, the people who are just not tech savvy and just really terrified right now, and then the people who maybe who have kids who are younger, who they know they are going to be online constantly and maybe don't have as much sort of I guess suspicion of just everything
Right.
online. So they're growing up in this world with all of this AI generated content. How would you sort of advise those two ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, there are a bunch of things there to unpack. I think with elderly people tend to be more susceptible to some of the attacks, just because they want that connection, especially if they're lonely. And the criminals prey on those who are lonely, who have a need. They know how to spot that. They know how to find it. They will go through social media very carefully to find that person. I worry a lot about kids, and I've spent a lot of time as a father of three worrying about them, instructing them, trying to teach them. They do not have large social media accounts. They're very careful. Now they're connected because you can't get a teenager today to send a normal text. They only communicate through apps like Snapchat and that kind of stuff. Which I wish they wouldn't, because it's just not secure and it can be used against them. But it is what it is. It's either like you can't talk to any of your friends, or let's do what I do and educate them. Be smart. Know how people are going to try to trick you. Know how people are going to find you. Don't put content out there that you don't want people to see. Don't chat with people you don't know. Like, we have a rule that you have to have touched them in the last year, right? Otherwise, they're not real people. If you don't have friends that are online, people that you solely meet online are not your friends. You don't even know whether they're real people, right? So that education is very important, and kids are incredibly susceptible to this because, like you said, and very wisely, they grew up with it. It's part of their life. Us Gen Xers, like that's my little generation, we don't trust anything. We're very self-sufficient. We don't need anybody to help us. We could and are kind of less. We grew up with technology, but we had to change our technology every couple of years. Like I'm the generation who went from records to cassette tapes, then you had your whole cassette tape library, and you throw that out and get CDs, and then throw that out and buy a bunch of MP3s, and you wonder why we're angry all the time. We've spent all our money on music. Baby boomers, they're a little bit more susceptible, my father's generation. But then our kids, especially the youngest generations, they just believe what they see. And they scroll and they see. And then the more you scroll, now these algorithms just keep giving you the things that you stop on. So it's like it is a designed echo chamber that trains them into something that you as a parent might not want. And it leads to attacks. There is a rise in teen suicide because attackers are getting them to, they're impostering somebody online. This happens a lot to boys, teen boys. They'll pretend they're a beautiful girl, and they'll go back and forth, and they'll start chatting, and it's really nice, and then it gets a little spicy, and then the avatar, because it's not a real person, sends a naked picture, and then entices the young teen boy to send a naked picture back. Now the attackers have already done all the research about this poor kid, and the next picture that comes across is that kid's naked picture surrounded by a collage of all his friends and family and classmates, with a little note that if you don't pay us money, we're sending this to everyone you know. And they want more and more money, and at some point that poor kid has no more money to send, and And sometimes when they don't seek help, they decide to end their life because they're so terrified of the embarrassment that's going to happen. So it's really important to talk to your kids too. One, not to do that, but if you do that, I'm always here for you. You know, don't be embarrassed. Like, I'm always on your side. You have to reinforce that with your children. So yeah, education is key there. I'll add one more thing because we were talking about AI, something I worry about a lot with our children. And I position this by saying, what happens when there's no blank pages? Just think of that for a minute. Our kids, if you watch how they study, how they learn, how they write. Now, I'm an author, I'm a writer. This is really serious to me. They start with AI generated content. They get an essay from a teacher. They go into any one of the AI. There's millions of them out there. Write this essay for me, and then they edit it. And they're getting better and better in figuring out how to write it in a way and then edit it in a way. You can even go to another AI to say, now rewrite this so it doesn't look like AI wrote it. And then they're handing it. They've learned nothing about writing. They've learned nothing about using imagination at all. They just became editors. It's regurgitation. It's not creation. And creation is so important and I'm afraid of a day when we have no more creatives. Nobody's creating anymore. Everybody's just recycling the same stuff through AI. And that troubles me. I think there was a movie called Idiocracy. That's when we'll hit that point.
Yeah, you bring up a fear that I have as well, that, one day YouTube, for example, in some dystopian future, is just going to be AI generated content, right? So like, for example, I use, like, when a new product comes out, there are all these, I watch all the tech reviews on YouTube, and everyone's trying to get out their review first because you
Right.
want to do it. If you can use AI to generate both the content and the video, you could, there's going to be like this arms race happening, and then pretty soon we don't have any original content, or there's going to be less of
Right.
it. So
And
yeah.
AI just looks at what's been done before and rehashes it, as opposed to, some of it creates new. That's some of the most interesting stuff when AI is imagining, and we call it hallucinations, and it's just bizarre, crazy stuff. I think that's the most fun, the fun things that AI creates. But some of it is just, just stiggy and horrible, like monsters and crazy, weird things. Like the connections AI makes, sometimes you wonder, like, where'd this stuff come from? And then you realize that it's learning from us. We're the crazy people.
Yeah, and it's like, and sometimes, Chat GPT or any of them, they just lie to you. You'll ask a very basic question like, what's the
Yes.
birthday of this celebrity or something, and it will just tell you something completely wrong. Like,
Yeah.
and we just accept it's true because it's AI, right? We just think
Yeah, but
intelligence.
it's not. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's not like you still have to fact check. You can't have AI write a paper for you with endnotes, and think it's going to be right. I will use AI when I'm writing to, I'll say, I've sourced an article in what I'm writing, and I hate writing, I hate drafting the endnote, the whole process. So I'll use an AI function to write the endnote, and it's terrible sometimes. I always have to go in and edit. Uh, Sometimes the endnote is completely wrong. Like it's not even the article that I'm trying to cite. So you always have to double check. It's going to get better and better. I wish that, give me an AI function that just writes endnotes perfectly, and I'll be super happy. That's really all I need, because I despise having to write those things, and they have to be in the perfect format. And yeah, those are the ways that I think writers can use it effectively. Um, as someone who's a thought leader and starting a newsletter, I'll grab 4 or 5 stories, and I think I want to write about one of these, I want to source one of these, and I'll ask AI summarize these 5 stories into 1 paragraph each. Right, that saves me a lot of time having to read them all, and I can just read the summaries and go, okay, this is the one that I really want to think about. That's really helpful. So using AI to cut down on the time that you take to do sort of the mundane work that isn't creative, I think is where it shines. But we shouldn't be using it to to fully create for us. That still needs to come out of our minds. Otherwise, you're not really creating anything, are you?
So let me give you a question as we sort of wrap things up. Let's say we're at this pivot point, right? And it can go, what's a worst case scenario with AI and cybersecurity and this, everything that can go wrong, and a best case scenario? What are the two futures at the end of the spectrums that you can foresee?
Right. Let's start with the best case scenario. I think AI is a tool that is going to make us better, faster, smarter, and more efficient. And really that last point is the most important. Efficient. We're going to be able to do more with less time. And time is the most valuable commodity on earth. It's not money. You can always make money. You need time to do that. It's time. Time to get your work done, to be with your family, to enjoy your life, to go on vacation. You don't get time back. You can lose all your money and make more, but you can never make more time. And what AI gives us is time. It makes things easier. Now, on the downside, it makes us lazy, and we need to be careful to not fall, as I said earlier, into that creative trap where we're using it to create and we're not creating ourselves. The worst thing that AI can do, I think, if you want a real dystopian future, it's not Skynet and the Terminator and taking over, and AI coming like fully online into some consciousness that decides, humanity is a scourge on the earth because they're killing the environment. And so we have to kill all of them, and then it'll just be robots walking around. I don't think that's never going to happen. That's science fiction. But what could happen is that this battle, this cyber war that's happening right now between crime and espionage and cybersecurity doesn't go the way we need it to go. That cybersecurity is always tripping a little, is always playing catch up, and that cybercrime starts to win. We're going to see massive cyber attacks that I've sadly predicted that in the next year or two, by 2026, certainly there will be a catastrophic cyber attack here in the United States. And I'm talking, we will lose lights and power. It will be days or weeks, and it's going to be worse than the pandemic. That's what I'm worried about. And AI can help those attacks happen.
Interesting. And yeah, it is. I wonder how we'll look at this time and point in history when it comes to AI and cybersecurity in general in 10 or 20 years, and say kind of how we can look back at the Hanssen case, right? And sort of the cybersecurity, the way things worked then, like that you mentioned. And I
Right.
wonder how we'll look back at now and say, we should have done this, or we weren't doing enough of this, or we did really good at this, but it evolved into this whole other thing. I'm very, very curious. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. And
We'll
hopefully
have to wait and see.
the more
The
positive version.
technology
Yeah.
technology is interesting like that. If you live long enough, you see massive changes. We can't predict what the world will look like in the next 5 years. It's impossible. Let's just stop trying, because technology not only progresses in the lanes it's in, something new explodes and comes onto the scene and changes everything. AI is one of those changes. The internet was one of those changes. You go all the way back, the printing press, right? These changes in technology alter society. And hey, AI is just one of those things. So we're going to have to absorb it, make it work for us, and deal with the downsides, just like any technology.
Well, I appreciate your time talking about these topics, because it is it's a massive topic. I could ask you for hours and hours and hours, but fortunately you've written grade A, but also you're working on the book now.
Right.
What can people expect? Where to find the book? Do you have a working title? Are you using
The
AI to
the
tweak
title's
things?
The Invisible Threat.
Mhm.
It's with HarperCollins, so it'll be sold everywhere books are sold. We'll probably do an Audible version and on Kindle e-reader. It's going to come out probably mid 2025.
Great. I will make sure that when it comes out that I'll post links and everywhere everybody can find you. Are there any other places, socials or anything else that
Yeah,
people should
I'm
find?
very active on LinkedIn. That's kind of my jam. A little bit less on X. Got an Instagram account, but it's more just see what other people are doing. But you can find me and learn all about me at my website, www.ericoneil.net. And there are links there to all my socials.
And I'll leave links for everybody watching and listening in the show notes and descriptions, so where everybody can find you. Thank you again so much for your time and sharing really what is just like I said, just a fascinating topic. And I really hope we end up on that positive version of events.
Yeah, I'm an old spy hunter, but I'm also a cup is half full person. I think we'll be okay. I don't think we're going to end up in the doom and gloom. We're always going to have moments of it, but at the end of the day, we're pretty resilient as a species.
Thanks for watching this episode of the foXnoMad podcast, and thank you, Eric, for being a guest. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I'll see you in the next episode.